So my talk today is on cold atmospheric plasmas in biology and medicine. And it's all about the fundamentals. So I have a note here to start with is I just want to emphasize that in this talk, I am only presenting the fundamental idea or the rationale behind why cold atmospheric plasma is good technology for medical application. So I won't go in specific, application and therapies like wound healing, cancer treatment, decontamination, etc. I'm just going to talk about the scientific basis why it's a good idea to use plasma technology for medical and biological application. So here is an example of cold atmospheric plasma sources developed by various groups all over the world. So there are some BBDs and some plasma jets and some handheld devices that can deliver low temperature plasma in the ambient environment. And these plasmas are safe to apply on cells and tissues. So what's in caps, which is called atmospheric plasmas? What's in them that's useful for us? So of course, since we apply usually a high potential between electrodes, we're going to have electric fields, and we have UV emission that we have to look out for. We have, of course, charged particles, since we have the plasma, there's negatives and negatively charged, positively charged. And of course, we have reactive species. Some are including oxygen-based and nitrogen-based, and radicals and non-radicals. So this schematic here kind of summarizes the situation that we are discussing when we expose biological cells to plasma. So the plasma, let me turn on my laser pointer here. So the plasma is going to generate all these agents, from a charged particle to radicals to ROS, reactive oxygen species, RNS, reactive nitrogen species, and some electromagnetic field and radiation like UV radiation. And this will interact with the cell, first, of course, with the cell wall and cell membranes, and then this species may even penetrate in the cell and react with the internal organelles of the cells and the proteins and the DNA, etc. For example, if we are talking about, let's say, exposing pathogenic microorganisms to plasma, so the priority targets will be the infectious viruses, and then biofilms, and maybe misfolded proteins such as prions, and of course planktonic cells also. So what we need to understand, the basic understanding is we need to know the formation of the RONs, which are the ROS and RNS, and their distribution and in time and in space. And then, of course, since most cells are covered by liquid and biological fluids, we need to understand the interaction between the RONs and the liquid state. And we also need to develop the basic biological understanding about the impact of the RONs on DNA and RNA and proteins and lipids and all this, cellular, subcellular, and maybe on the molecular level too. And very important is we need to also have a control process. We have to develop a way to have the process well controlled, so that we can achieve the result that we aim for. Of course, we're not going to just apply in practice, plasmas on just one cell, but it's going to be for medical application on tissues. And when you apply plasma on a tissue, you're going to have the primary effect, which is usually the short-lived and even the long-lived species on the surface here of the tissue. And then there is some penetration, maybe a few tens of micrometer, maybe a few hundreds of micrometer penetration, and they have a secondary effect of the interaction of the long-lived ROS within deep in the tissue, and usually, most of these species will not penetrate too deep in the tissue, but there could be some other processes that can propagate the effect of the plasma. So to summarize here, so we have a cap source, and then of course, let's say in case of a plasma jet, we have the afterglow, and we have all these species that are generated, and radiation also. They're gonna first encounter a liquid phase, and then there are going to be secondary and tertiary species created with the interaction with the liquid or the fluid, and then that will reach the biological cells. And there is a big time, span here to consider, because the gas phase chemistry occurs in microsecond and nanosecond. But the liquid phase chemistry can be in milliseconds to a minute, but the biological effect and the biochemistry can go on for, can take hours and even days. So there is this, long time that the effect will take to show on the cells or tissues. So there are many important factors to consider here, and I have listed them here, so you can take a look at those. Again, this diagram kind of illustrates it even more, where we have the plasma that the gas in the gaseous phase, that where you have gas phase chemistry, and you have all these species that are generated, that before they go into the bulk of the liquid, there is an interface at the surface where there is penetration of some of these species that will create some other species here that can also go into the bulk of the liquid, and before they even arrive to interact with actual organic biological matter. So this is just for better, more illustration of what I'm talking about here. So since the penetration in the liquid is very important, I thought I'll show you here a table that shows the Henry's law solubility constant for various species. Is argon, O2, O3, OH, hydrogen peroxide, nitric oxide, nitrogen dioxide. So from this table, you can see that not all species are as soluble as others in the liquid. For example, if you look at hydrogen peroxide, the Henry's constant is a lot larger than some other species. So it's we expect it to be a lot more soluble in the liquid. On the right, I show you another table that is the estimated half-life of species in physiological liquids. So from OH to superoxide to peroxynitride to nitric oxide, nitrate, nitrites, hydrogen peroxide, and you can see that it varies from microseconds, the half-life, to seconds, and for other species like hydrogen peroxide, nitrate, nitrite, it can go. The half-life can be as long as minutes. So this needs to be taken into consideration, to understand the, all the stages of the system when we are gonna expose biological tissues to a cat, to cold atmospheric plasma. Very quickly here, as most of you know very well, there are basically two type of discharges that have been used in medical research using plasmas. One is the DBD, dielectric barium discharge, and the other is the atmospheric pressure plasma jets. The DBD, as you know, can come in various geometrical configuration. Here's a schematic showing you a few setups of DVDs, and this is a picture taken in my lab many years ago, actually, of a diffused DVD in helium with a little bit of a mixture of air. Of course, nowadays a lot of people prefer to use atmospheric pressure plasma jets because they emit this plume into the ambient environment. So it's a lot easier to treat objects and treat, targets, tissues or wounds or whatever, using jets instead of using DVD, which the plasma is confined between the electrodes. Here the plasma is out and you can accurately apply it on a location that you want to treat. So they have a lot of advantages, of course. One of them is they can be handheld and they can be driven from pulse DC to RF to microwaves, the power sources. Here are a few configurations of the plasma jets. You have, for example, jets that have external rings, ring electrodes, and you even have jets that have a single electrode, pin electrode. And this is the plasma pencil, which we developed back in my lab in 2004, and that we used ring electrode on dielectric discs, and so the plasma here doesn't come in contact with any electrode. And I can show you here a visual of the plasma pencil. So this is a schematic, and this is the plasma plume interacting with the surface, and here the plasma plume into a well where we are treating some physiological liquid. Of course, this just when we first developed them back in the early 2000s, we really didn't understand exactly how they work, and so we did some diagnostic to understand the mechanism behind the generation of this plasma jet. Now, of course, nowadays they are, applied everywhere, and people have different configuration. But back in, almost 20 years ago, that was a little bit, still a mystery. So we did some diagnostic here for. This is a pulsed system where the pulse width a few hundred nanosecond to microsecond with rep rate and a few kilohertz. And this is the system is in helium, and we flow it at this flow rates. and then we discovered that that the plume is actually not continuous as we see it in the naked eye, but it's actually discrete, and the jet is sustained by a guided ionization wave. So ionization waves that are guided in the gas channel, in the helium channel, and they became known as plasma bullets. And we found out about this in my lab, and then we discovered at that time that there is another group actually in Germany that was independently of us working on some plasma jet, and they also discovered this plasma bullet. So it was independently, seen back in my lab, and also at the University of Wuppertal in Germany around 2005. So here's an image of the bullet that propagates out from the nozzle, and this here shows you the velocity of propagation, and you can see it's tens of kilometers per second. So they are hypersonic propagation, and uh, we define three phases. One is a launching phase when it comes out of the nozzle of the jet, propagation phase, and then ending phase where the bullet finally extinguishes because of a lot of diffusion of air into the helium channel. Okay, so again, to summarize this, this is uh, a figure given to me by my friend Stefan Reuter, and here he kind of illustrates how the plasma jet generates all this interesting cocktail of species that will ultimately be interacting with the target to create some other species. So the toolbox that we have, especially when we are using the jets in the ambient environment, which is obviously has nitrogen and oxygen. So the toolbox is really this ROS and RNS that we are generating, and that will have biological effects. Huh? So what are these biological effects? Well, here, for example, for some species here, like hydroxyl and hydrogen peroxide, they can cause peroxidation of the lipid bilayer, which are fatty acids, and as you know, they are phospholipids and cholesterols and things like that in the membrane of cells. They can, of course, cause oxidation of proteins and oxidation of DNA. They can even cause some etching. When you have oxygen radicals, you can get etching of the biomaterials. And so this is the cell wall, if you like, with the lipid bilayer, and embedded in it, there are many proteins that act as gateways to control what comes in the cell and what comes out of the cell. And so the plasma that comes from externally will first thing will do is interact with all these lipids and proteins that constitute the cell membranes. Of course, for RNS, reactive nitrogen species, one very important molecule is NO, nitric oxide, and then it's already been discovered, many decades ago, that internally our own cells, they use it for a lot of function, including proliferation of fibroblasts, regulation of immune deficiencies, induction of phagocytosis, regulation of collagen synthesis. So this NO molecule is a very important, has a lot of biological functions that our cells use. And of course, the plasma, we can generate that and supply it, if you like, transport it toward the cells and the tissues. So the situation is this, huh? So you have a source that will give you the ROS and the RNS, and with some control, then you can do to the sink, which is the actual target, which is the cellular environment, and it depends on the dose that you deliver. For low exposure, you can actually cause beneficial effect, which we call eustress, which can, helps healthy cells proliferate, tissue regeneration. But for high exposure, you can cause a distress, and so you have disruption of the redox signaling that can lead to cell death, apoptosis, maybe even necrosis. So the figure to the right shows you an example comparison of this redox mechanism in normal cells and cancer cells. So there is a certain threshold that of oxidation and that our cells can tolerate, and so a certain level of ROS that can be tolerated. But if you go beyond that threshold, you can cause harm to the cells. Now, normal cells have well-regulated system versus cancer cell, where their redox is dysregulated or unregulated, and if we supply even more stress or more ROS, more oxidative stress, and that may go beyond the threshold, which will cause the cell death. So this is just to to illustrate, that that our cells, they learned how to deal with, oxidative stress to a certain level. However, if you overwhelm the cells with, for example, reactive oxygen species, that can go beyond a certain threshold that the cells cannot tolerate anymore. And that happens a lot more for cancer cells because they are a lot more active, they multiply a lot more, consume a lot more resources. So they are in higher oxidative stress than normal cells. This is another schematic that illustrates some of that, where this here is the ROS level. So for low levels of ROS, you can cause beneficial effect, and such as proliferation, cell survival. And then, of course, as the ROS level gets higher, then you start causing some problem, including even it could be mutation or things like that. And then as the ROS level gets really high, then you can cause cell senescence and even cell death. So the low level of ROS beneficial, ROS, high level of ROS can lead to cell death. And again, our cells are always, there is a certain kind of balance they're trying to establish between the oxidative stress and creating antioxidants. So what I'm trying to arrive at here is that measuring and controlling the concentration of ROS is crucial to apply low temperature plasma on biological targets. So what I'm going to do in the following slides, I'll show you some of the measurements that have been done on this to evaluate ROS, both from experiment and modeling. I start here with atomic oxygen, and you can see here the density versus addition of oxygen, and this is an argon plasma, and where some oxygen admixture has been added to the flow, and using the Talif here, you can see that there is a certain percentage that gives you a peak, production of O2, of O, sorry. And to the right, this is a kind of a two-dimensional plot where it shows you the distribution of the oxygen, the atomic oxygen, both along the axis and radially. There's another one that shows, for example, production of ozone with flow rate and with absorbed power. So if you, for example, want to minimize the production of ozone, you would, have to determine how much flow rate and how much power you should apply to get minimal production of ozone, for example. And this one shows you using laser-induced fluorescence measurement of OH on a plasma jet. And then the distribution of that and along the radial dimension here, you can see production is highest of course, in the center, and then dies out as you go to the edges of the jet, and this is done for several flow rates. OH, this here shows the absolute OH density as in a system where water vapor is introduced in a controlled way, and to see the effect of production of OH, the effect of water vapor on the production of OH. And this is also done using laser-induced fluorescence, and done on the KinPan, the device developed by the group in Greifswald. And here, this is a spatially resolved OH with different flow rates at a fixed power. So you can see that at a certain flow rate you get the maximum better distribution of OH. This is if you put a target, because ultimately you want to apply this on the target. So you can, this is the two-dimensional distribution of OH from all the way from the the nozzle of the device down to the target. So you can see that the OH is maximum both close to the nozzle and on the surface of the target, and of course diminish as you go radially. The characteristic of the surface is also very important. So it depends on the permittivity, the conductivity of the surface. It can affect the actual generation of the species from the plasma, because it will affect the plasma itself, the plume, in case of a plasma jet. So you can see here illustrates the difference between a dry surface and a wet surface. You can see it's quite a substantial difference. And also there's a case of an actual skin. So and this is distribution in the radial dimension, radially. So this really illustrates very well the effect and the impact of the state, if you like, of the surface that you are working with, that you are trying to treat. This one shows the concentration of hydrogen peroxide, both in gas phase and in the liquid phase. The liquid happens to be RPMI. So they use FTIR for the gas and colorimetric assay for the liquid. And this is the concentration of H2O2 as a function of humidity. So obviously, the higher the humidity, the more hydrogen peroxide you are generating. The hydrogen peroxide can also interact with nitrite and can give you peroxynitrite. So and water. So peroxynitrite also have important biological functions, and you can see here for there are two pathways. One can lead to caspase activation that will trigger, initiation of apoptosis, and the other pathway where peroxynitrite can cause peroxidation and nitration and protein oxidation, etc., and that can lead to necrosis. So apoptosis, as you know, is a programmed cell death, and necrosis is when the cell is basically injured and loses its content to the outside environment. So it's a more of a, dramatic way, a pathway for the cell to die. This here shows you a profile of the NO density. Um, so both along the axial direction and also radially. So and to the right, the NO concentration in part per million as a function of percent of admixture of air into an argon flow. This was done using the Kinpan. And here you can see that a certain, a percentage of admixture will give you the maximum generation of NO. This is done mostly by modeling. This shows you the various ROS and RNS species that are generated. This one is a temporal distribution, so the variation with time, and this one here shows you variation with distance of the various species. So, so for example, here you can see the next to the nozzle, and then in the far effluent of the jet, versus in this region here. So this will probably would be the region where you're gonna uh, have some target or biological target to treat. So this gives you an idea, how these species, their profile, their distribution in both in time and in space. So these are taken from two different sources. This is an example, just to illustrate what, I talked about all this, production of ROS and RNS and their measurements. And as an example, the effect of ROS on peptidoglycan. Peptidoglycan forms the cell wall of bacteria, and it's made out of sugar and amino acids, and it's kind of a mesh. And it depends, if you have gram-negative bacteria, it's a very thin layer. If gram-positive, it's a thicker layer. And so what are the effects, for example, of ROS on this very important, structure on the cell wall, the peptidoglycan? So you can see here for different this done, by the way, by molecular dynamic simulation by Yusupov et al. And this table here where they show the effect of atomic oxygen, ozone, OH, and hydrogen peroxide on the peptidoglycan. And they wanted to see what happened to the molecular bonds. And you can see, for example, hydrogen peroxide, there's a high occurrence of CO bond breakage and CC breakage. Well, in this case, not so high, but a lot higher here. And this indicates that hydrogen peroxide, is affecting the sugar, the saccharide component of the peptidoglycan. So that way we can study on the molecular level what's happening when this ROS and RNS actually interact with the biological or the cellular component of a biological cells. I also mentioned at the beginning about the effect of that we have electric field. As you all know, we do have electric field present, and jets have actually quite plasma jets have quite high electric field. This is measurement done in my own lab back around 2013, where we measured up to 15 kilovolt per centimeter at the the tip of the plasma jet. These to the right is actually simulation done by George Nadis, which shows the electric field both in axial position along the jet and at different times. So there is this quite high electric field present. So and electric field can affect biological cells. It's well known that high electric field pulses can cause pores to appear in the cell membrane. It's called electroporation. And if you have ROS and RNS, this really opens the door to them to enter inside the cells. So electric field can work synergistically with the ROS and RNS. And once the RNS and ROS are inside, they can actually interact with the internal component, the internal organelles of the cells. All right, so I'm kind of probably running out of time, so I wanted to give you a small, quick, brief conclusion. So what is all this? Does it really actually work? Especially if you want to use it for medical application, does it have actual beneficial and positive results on patients? So I'm going to show you the two examples that some of you probably are aware of. One is the first clinical trial ever conducted using low temperature plasma. It was done by led by Georg Isbari in Germany, in Munich, Germany, in a hospital there, where they treated patients with diabetic ulcers. And in this case here, this was done by 2010, in 2010, with under the direction of the group of Greg Morfill in Garching, Germany. This shows a 61-year-old with a venous ulcer. And it shows you they use argon plasma. They called the device at the time microplaster. And you can see how the venous ulcer, how it looked like at the beginning. And 7 days later, after treatment, which is a 2-minute argon plasma, they treat for 2 minutes. After 7 days, and after 7 treatment, and after 11 treatment, and you can see there is really a drastic, improvement of the of that wound. And the second case that was done in the University of Greifswald under the leadership of Professor Mettelman, and he did some work on head and neck cancers. And this is a patient here with squamous cell carcinoma, and you can and they use the KinPan. This is a plasma jet. Uses argon. You can see the state of the patient. This is first image was taken in April 2016, and then after a treatment regimen from April to June, you can see here, and then finally in August, and you can see there is really a very impressive improvement. Of course, this is just one case. So we can't generalize to all cancers, or there's no, statistical, significance that it's going to work every time. But however, this here is quite an impressive work, and that was done already, 6 years ago. So to conclude, what we really want is we want to have a paradigm shift, and ideally what we want is replace physical and chemical therapies, physical, like cutting, for example, the knife, or actual chemical, medication, to energy-based therapies, and non-thermal and low energy, so we can get the minimal side effect on the tissue and on the patient. So this is the the big objective uh, uh, that we want to achieve, and completely uh, uh, offer a safe and effective energy-based therapies. In this case, plasma-driven, uh, plasma-based or plasma-assisted therapies. So I stop here, and I thank you for your attention. And to finish, I just wanted to tell you that if you want to learn more and have a much more detail to learn about this application, I'm proposing these four review papers. They are very extensive. They have a lot more details in it, and you can check. You can check these. And thank you again for inviting me, and thank you for your attention. Okay, bye-bye.